Welcome to the HR Dialogues, a show where we talk about HR and the changing world of work. I'm your host, Dr. Dieter Veldsman, and today I'm joined by Emmanuel Michael, founder, global HR leader, for a discussion on how we see the role of the Chief HR Officer changing in future. Welcome to the HR Dialogues, where we learn from people practitioners as they navigate the emerging world of work. Emmanuel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Dr. Veldsman. Thank you.
Emmanuel, introduce yourself to our guests. Who are you? What do you do, and what brings you here today?
My name is Emmanuel Michael. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm a certified leadership coach and career success coach as well. I have over 20 years experience in the HR space. I grew from the rank of assistant HR manager to a director of HR in the hospitality space. And then from the hospitality, I moved into the financial services sector, where I spent close to 12 years.
I'd love the listeners to get to know you a little bit better. So, if I can kickstart, what has been the best piece of advice that you've received in your HR career up to now that stuck with you?
Okay, so there is one key advice that I've received from one of my line managers. So it says, when you are in doubt, you need to seek help, seek guidance from your line manager. Don't go doing things blindly and then you get it wrong. So if you are asked to do something and you're not very sure how to proceed, ask for guidance, ask for assistance, and it helps me to ensure that I'm in check and I'm doing the right thing. I don't go doing things and then assuming, there are no assumptions that will lead me into making some errors.
Emmanuel, it leads me slightly into our topic today, and maybe just to introduce the topic. Globally, a couple of big shifts starting to happen within the HR domain. We see generative AI, we see a changing labor market on the one side, we see new expectations from organizations. And then on the HR front, we see a changing skill set, much more importance in terms of things like business acumen, working with data, digital adoption, the ability to execute. And something that has come to light is this question around, but how are we going to manage the careers of the future? And particularly for our conversation today, what does HR leadership look like in the future? Now, a very worrying statistic that we've seen recently is that only 4 out of 10 senior HR leaders are actually interested to develop into the chief HR officer role. A lot of people reach a particular level in HR, then they say, I don't want to take that next step. That's not for me. And this is due to organizational politics. It's due to personal ambitions that lie outside of the organizational environment. And I'd love to explore a bit how you see HR leadership changing and how can we motivate and drive people to really want to build a long-term career and build a healthy, sustainable talent pipeline for HR professionals. What is different today than what it was when you started your career in HR?
Today, HR is moving from that tactical role to becoming more strategic. There used to be a slogan that we need to give HR, we need to ensure that HR comes to the table, get HR to the table. But today, what we've seen is that the table is there. It's now just for the HR professionals or the HR leader to seize that opportunity to be at that table and contribute strategically to the conversations in that particular business. HR before used to be focused on how to just manage the people. But today, the focus is not just managing the people. The focus is managing the people to be able to help the organization achieve its goal. Okay? So that's the focus. HR is critical. It has become a critical subject, an agenda item when board conversations are going on. So when we discuss about where we want to get the organization to be, say, for instance, we're having challenges with the business, sales, revenues, you don't just look at the finance people or the sales team. You actually look at the HR manager to come up with initiatives, ideas of what we need to do. How do we get our people to be as productive as we want them to be? HR also has gone beyond just only managing the people. It has gone as far as looking at the stakeholders. There are different stakeholders in the organization. So how do you get the organization to provide and manage the interest of all the stakeholders. Okay, so if when we look at the stakeholders include the internal people, stakeholders include the board. Okay, so HR needs to be interested in what is it that the board members want to get out of the business? What is it that the community wants to get out of the business? Okay, what is it that the employees internally, the internal stakeholders, what do they want to get out of the business?
I love the comment you make around almost HR beyond the table, because some of the best advice that I've gotten in my HR career is, you've got a seat at the table. It's what you do with it that counts. And I think sometimes very much this age old battle, that people have around where HR is positioned in the organization, what credibility does it carry, etc. I think we are in a new era where we need to claim that the space has been claimed, if I can call it that, but it is now what do we do with it as HR professionals when you actually do operate at that level? I really like the point that you make that, some of the work that we've been doing, and I think it's beyond operational. I like the mention of tactical work, moving into the strategic domain and really making it practical, that there's multiple stakeholders that we do need to look at. The big shift I'm seeing is HR also having to engage a lot more with industry regulators, also having to engage a lot more with communities where organizations exist. So this role around, how do we deal with the board? How do we deal with external stakeholders? How do we still then operationalize and make HR so integrated into the business that people start automatically seeing where it fits? I think is such an important and an exciting avenue and a venture for HR in the future. Emmanuel, that leads a little bit towards the fact to say, if the function is changing so much, how do we lead the function? As I mentioned, HR leadership, I sometimes think we don't give enough attention to our own in terms of how do we develop HR leaders. I think we focus very much on developing business leaders as our responsibility, which is definitely important. However, we also need to think about, but what is the HR leadership of the future going to look like? And what are some of the things that we expect them to be able to do?
Okay, so this person, there are certain skills that I think this person should have, okay, which are critical for the chief people officer of in the future. Number one is strategic thinking. So we've talked about strategy, right? So the person has to ensure that their people strategies, whatever people strategy that they are coming up with, aligns with the business objective. And the other thing again I've also seen, or which I think will be very relevant, is data literacy. So all chief people officers need to make sure that they understand data, okay? Because data is what will support whatever initiative that they want to introduce. And then today, with the advent of AI, it has become very critical that there is need for this chief people officer in the future to ensure that they begin to understand how to utilize the artificial intelligence, become digital savvy, leverage HR technology and tools that will help them to enhance employee experience. Emotional intelligence is also very key. Today, you see a lot of people, you give someone a task or expect a deliverable from the person, and the person is saying their mental health is impacted because you are demanding productivity. So emotional intelligence is becoming very, very key. So there's need for the chief people officer to find a way to be able to empathize with the employee and foster that positive culture. Communication skills is also very key. How to communicate and ensure that people actually understand the message that you are trying to pass. Because I've talked about different stakeholders, the language of these different stakeholders, there is need for the chief people officer to understand exactly how to say those things so that the message, they can get the message across. Then the other thing again is that we notice that the world is continually changing. Things are happening every now and then. The last pandemic that we had was the COVID, so we don't really know what is going to happen next. So there needs to be ready, okay, for any change that is going to come, and be ready to adapt immediately. The other thing again I want to talk about is technical expertise. So there is need to stay up to date. Good enough, the AIHR website has been a very useful resource for me. So I go there from time to time. I love the kind of information that is published every now and then there. So it helps to keep me up to date. And that is what I also would expect. So the chief people officer needs to make sure that they are up to date. And then today we're having a situation whereby we have both virtual remote hybrid work experience. So there is need for any future chief people officer to ensure that they're able to support both remote and flexible work arrangements.
That's fantastic. I always think about it in the sense that I think there's a couple of things for the future chief people officer, right? And you've mentioned quite a few of them. It's firstly around what I know. So, what is the knowledge base? For me, it's also then around what I do. So, what are the skills that I need actually to be able to operate at that level? And something that's really interesting for us that we're finding in our community is that business acumen is really interesting because at a very entry level in HR, we actually don't develop it. And then it starts being developed as people start becoming a lot more senior. But then at some stage, when you start entering the executive domain, having to deal with the board, etc., there's an assumption that business acumen has actually already been established. For me, then it's also around a big thing around how do I actually do it? How do I show up as the chief people officer? Because you do have multiple relationships to manage. Think a lot of people in the organization also have certain assumptions and look up to you, and that's both good and challenging at the same time. And then lastly, it's about who I am as a chief people officer. What is it that you believe in? I think the value system, the ethics, and I think a lot of that will come in also, as you've mentioned, when we start being faced with new challenges at that level around how are we going to utilize AI? What are we going to do about talent mobility? As there's political and economic uncertainty, what do we do there in the organization? Really as part of that as well. So, Emmanuel, I want to play devil's advocate for a moment, right? And I want to ask you the question: how ready do you think today's HR leaders are for this transition, and what can we do to help them?
I think what I would say is that the today's HR leaders are, most of them are in different stages. I don't think we have everyone at that top level where they are ready to be able to function effectively as required. Okay. And because everyone is not at the same level, their developmental level is completely different. They are all in various stages. There is need right now to have like a curriculum that would help people, one, assess their current status. When we look at the skills that are required to function effectively as the CPO, the Chief People Officer, or the CHRO of the future. Okay, these are the skills that are required. Just like you've also described what you know, what I do, and who am I. When we look at those critical skills that are required, there has to be some sort of tool that will enable each individual assess themselves and then know what level am I at. Maybe if you have a 4 scale level, level 1 to 4, am I in level 1, level 2, 3, or 4? And identify those gaps. And then begin to look for resources that will help to be able to close those gaps to ensure that you build those skills, either acquire certain knowledge or acquire some sort of experience that will help you to be able to close those gaps.
There's also a big part of self-awareness, right? So, I think there, exactly to your point, we do need to be self-aware around where we find ourselves currently, because in the HR domain, one of the beautiful things I love about the profession is people come from various different backgrounds. Some people come from administration backgrounds, some come from psychology, some come from social backgrounds, education backgrounds. The downside of that, however, is that we actually don't have a baseline skill set that structures an HR career over time. So, to your point, to say, if I'm at a level 1, these are the things I can do. If I'm at a level 4, this is what the expectation would look like. If you look at professions like accounting, some of the finance, engineering professions, there's typically almost a proficiency model that walks with the profession over time. Whereas in HR, sometimes that is a little bit more fluid. I think there's other complexities on our side there as well. But I like your suggestion around start with where you are. And then we've also found just go and identify what that first next step for you is going to be. Because I think people kind of get taken aback when they start thinking about, oh, these are all the things I need to develop to be able to get there. Just take that first step and always know what that next step is going to be, on that particular roadmap. Emmanuel, I want to come back a little bit towards a point that you made earlier when we started talking about the board as a stakeholder. Now, I can remember before my very first CHRO role, going to the board was always a very, very stressful day for me. I put on the best suit. I tried to kind of prep as much as possible. Went into the meeting, and there was always at a time that I never knew, but what actually was my role there.
Okay, so in dealing with the board, there are several things that the chief people officer or the chief HR officer needs to consider in managing that dynamics better. So the first thing is relationship. Okay, relationship is key in everything that we do. And in order to build that relationship, trust, credibility is critical. Okay, so there's need for you to foster trust and understanding with the board members. And the only way you can foster that trust and understanding with the board members is by providing regular communication and updates. Okay, so they want to know, the board does not just want to know about okay, these are the processes, the activities that we've done in HR. No, that's not their interest. Their interest is in these activities that you've carried out. How have they impacted the business? If you're able to show that link, they now begin to trust you. And it makes it easy for you to say, okay, I want to increase a particular variable, a particular activity, because I've seen that with small inputs or investment that we've made in that particular space, we've been able to realize XYZ return. Okay. So the board will want to see that. And if you show that linkage, then they begin to now trust you. Okay. And as they begin to trust you, your credibility begins to rise within that organization. So that's one. So each time you now come to the board meeting and you say, okay, you already, before you come to the board meeting, you already know this is the direction that the business is going. So your conversation is always addressing how can the people practices, people initiatives, how can they help the business get or accomplish that particular objective, that business objective. So that will help you build that business, build that relationship. The other one is clear communication. So if we are presenting your HR strategy and plans, it needs to be clear. Okay? It needs to be concise. It needs to be data driven. Don't come to the meeting and want to share something because you've seen it happen in the other organization. You think it will be good there, or this is the trend. Okay, they are not really interested in the trend. They're interested in what you are suggesting. How would what sort of baseline data do you have? Okay, have you tried to find the root cause, the root problem within the organization, and how would the strategies you are recommending address those challenges? So clear communication is very critical. I've talked about aligning with company goals. So we need to ensure that every strategy that you bring to the board meeting aligns with with the company goal. And then aside from presenting, you are not just in the board meeting to talk. You also need to listen. Okay, so you need to encourage them to provide you feedback. Okay, you listen for the feedback, and when they raise concerns, address those concerns. Don't sweep some concerns under the carpet and move on. So active listening is very key. And then the board is interested in transparency and feasibility. So because they want to know what is going on, yes, they are not with you day to day to understand what is happening. Make sure that when you provide your updates, you provide updates, progress reports on those things that have been discussed at the previous board meeting, so they get to know where we are, and it makes it easy for you to sell through in the next board meeting. And then when you want to make decisions, don't just conclude everything on your own. I remember there was one of the meetings that I attended, and the board member was now asking me, okay, so this document that or this initiative that you've presented now, have you all agreed to go ahead with it? Or do you want any input from us? So you need to involve them in key decisions. Seek their input before you conclude. Don't come to let them know that you've concluded. Okay, so if you've concluded, they will now tell you, okay, so what's the need of the board? Because if you're able to conclude, then you don't really need us. So collaborative decision making is another way to make sure that you manage that dynamics properly. Then the other thing is education and awareness. So some board members might require some sort of HR training and workshop for them to understand the workings, okay, in HR. So make sure that opportunity is available for the board members. Then there's also need to set clear expectations, clearly define roles and expectations of the people oversight. What do you want the board to do for you? The board sees you as the expert in that particular field with the issue of people matters, and they expect that when you come to them, you should be providing some expert advice. Your presentation should be able to influence the kind of decision that they take.
Such good practical advice, Emmanuel. A couple of things that really stood out for me that I can also definitely attest to in my own career. The first one is be very aware of what is the role of the board and what you want from them. Because, eventually I learned whenever I went to the board, I always started with the purpose of why we are discussing is I either want advice, I want a decision, or it's something that we've done that you need to know about, or this is something that could potentially become a risk in future, or this is intended value that we want to drive. So always be very clear on why am I actually there and why are we engaging. Love the fact that you spoke about credibility and trust and regular communication. Work on those relationships, especially with key board members that are more interested in the oversight on things like, Remco, the ESG committees, social committees, etc. I experienced that quite a lot. That most board members actually don't have an HR background. Most people come from a financial background or a general business background, and their exposure and experience to HR is very limited to the environments that they've been in and what they've seen before. So don't go with the assumption that your board members are experts in HR and you know what they should be expecting from you. I think that educational process is really, really important and very, very valuable, especially if it's a newly established board or if it's members that have not necessarily served on boards and have had exposure to HR. Love the fact that there's the balance between listening. I made that terrible mistake in some of my first board meetings where, I thought I was there that they wanted things from me, as opposed to that I was actually also there to listen to what they kind of wanted to guide on and what was important for them and to really understand, where they were coming from and what that balance needs to be. And to your point around, you have to go to the board as a united front in terms of your own executive team. So I think definitely the focus on data driven outcomes. How do we also talk about and show the impact of what we do and why we do it, the general link. Big mistake I've made in the past there is I assume that people understand the link between things that we do. So surely if they want to have a sustainable business, they understand why I'm focusing on workforce planning and on talent development. But a lot of people don't make those connections because they're not from the domain, and they typically we have to kind of tell the story for them in a very simple, in a very very simple way. Emmanuel, advice for people aspiring to become HR leaders, what would you tell them?
One, they need to first of all understand the basics, okay? It's very critical for them to have that foundational HR knowledge. Very, very critical. When they've been able to gain that HR foundational knowledge, then the next for me will be to identify a mentor. Okay, they need a mentor because in my case, when I was coming up, I had a very good mentor and coach who was always guiding me. Okay, there are times when I took some wrong steps and he had to call me to order. Okay, the way you are behaving, it shows that you are not yet matured enough. So if I didn't have someone at that particular position to help to guide me, maybe I'll continue to make more mistakes. So we then agreed that before I take any decision, take any step, I need to check with him, okay, this is what I want to do, get some sort of guidance, then before I proceed. So that helped me subsequently when I now present myself before the leadership team, things began to change and work well for me. And then everyone is applauding what I'm doing, but I had someone behind me who was kind of guiding me and ensuring that I don't misstep.
I think we sometimes underestimate the role of mentorship and and coaching. And I mean, I've also found in my career having a network of mentors that you could go to either formally or informally. And sometimes just to check your thinking and to check your thoughts, because something that we are finding in the environment is that the chief people officer role, the chief HR officer role, is a very lonely part of the profession. You've kind of been elevated out of the level of having HR peers. So your peers are the business executives, but you're still doing a lot of work there around establishing your credibility and trust. And very often we find that these people say, but I feel I've got nowhere to go to where somebody also just needs to listen to me and my advice because I'm forever the person that people will come to. And I think that sense of loneliness is really something that we do need to think about in future around how do we guide people. And I found that mentorship and global communities and coaches, etc., really help you at that particular level because it's a tough job. Being a chief HR officer is a really tough job, and you need to make sure that you have the tools, but also the support structures that is going to kind of equip you for that as well. Emmanuel, we're reaching the end of our conversation. I've got a final question. I want you to look into the magic ball that you have and gaze into the future. You and I speak again in 10 years' time. What does HR look like?
What comes to mind now is the job, the structure of the job that we carry out is likely going to change. With AI coming in to play a critical role in this space, there are several HR activities that are likely going to be automated and handed over to an AI machine. And so there is the need for HR professionals to understand how AI is going to impact the work. Okay. And therefore, when that then happens, like recently I saw in terms of recruitment, shortlisting, and all that, you have an AI machine that is automatically receiving the applications and doing the shortlistings and presenting candidates for you to do the interviews. You even have the systems that go ahead to even interview uh, candidates and provide you with a report. And then yours is just to consider, maybe consider them for the next level interview. So these are some of the changes that I see. And therefore, it therefore means that the future chief people officer will be focused more now on only those things that require human intervention. And those will be more strategic responsibilities, things that you need to touch, feel. Those will be some of the things that the chief people officer is going to focus on going forward in the coming years. So that's exactly what I see how the job role is going to change. So and the focus is going to be mainly on productivity versus activity. So focus is not going to be on activity. All those activity stuff we'll have some technology that will take care of those things. So we'll be looking at what sort of productivity are we expecting.
Definitely the the focus on productivity outcomes beyond activity. I love that. And then to your point, I think it will be a very different world with very different expectations from the people function and what we need to do. Emmanuel, at the beginning when I opened up the episode for us, I spoke about the fact that we are facing a chief people officer crisis and that a lot of people don't want to develop into the role. So if you and I were trying to sell the chief HR officer role to aspiring people that wanted to think about their careers, what would be the main selling points that you would put on the table around why people should choose to become a chief HR officer in the longer term?
So there's this conversation that's going around the value of HR to our organization. So if you ask me, I will say that just like Dave Ulrich usually say, HR is not about HR. HR is about the business. And I would also like to add that HR is actually the business. If there's no HR, there's no business, because you discover that for every business to exist, even the conceptualization of that particular business idea, you need people. And that is HR. That's where HR responsibility begins. So you need people who will be able to then conceptualize what is this we want to do. Okay. And then you also need people to execute that thing that we've conceptualized. And then you also need people to consume those things that we eventually have produced. So if there is no HR, there is no people. So for anyone who wants to move into the HR space, they need to know that they are the critical, pivotal tool that is required for the success of any organization, even if it's countries. If there are no people now in this geographical space, that country does not exist. So you need people. And that is what HR does. What is the role of HR? HR role is actually to identify the right people that will help you to produce the right ideas, that will help you to come up with the right organization or company, that will help you to come up with the right product to satisfy the ideal people that have that particular need. So HR is needed to ensure that a business exists. So without HR, it's no business.
I sometimes get so frustrated when people talk about HR as a support function or as an enablement function and all those words we use. HR is business. That is just, the natural fact of it and the long and short of the story. Love your enthusiasm, Emmanuel, for the profession as well. And thank you very much for our conversation. Maybe a couple of points that stood out for me, and then I'll wrap up for us. definitely around the fact that the CHRO role in future and the HR leadership role is going to look very different in today in terms of the things that we will be busy with. Much more of a focus towards productivity, movements away from some of the activity based HR that we sometimes still find today. We spoke a lot about the changing skill set, a lot more data driven, a lot more strategic thinking that needs to come to the fore. EQ, leveraging technology. We spoke about the fact that how AI needs to be leveraged in the CHRO role in future as well for CHRO to have impact and be effective. Fantastic advice that you gave around how do we deal with the board. You need to be clear, you need to be concise, we need to create clarity around what we do, and also be aware of the fact that we are walking a journey with them over time, and it's a journey about establishing trust and establishing credibility in future as well. And you gave us a bit of a glimpse just of your view around what HR will look like in future and what we can look forward to, and then ultimately why people should join our profession, because we are the core and the heart of businesses that we will take forward. Emmanuel, thank you so much for your insights and sharing that with us. Where can people find out? Where can they also follow you and get to know about the great work that you're doing?
People can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn.
That's fantastic. Definitely want to encourage people to also follow you. Some great insights that you kind of share on a regular basis that I also definitely follow and look at as well. Emmanuel, thank you so much. Thoroughly enjoyed our episode. And to everybody
Me too.
listening, we will see you soon on the next episode of the HR Dialogues.